All right, guys. So we're gonna start with part 2 of our little 347 small block Ford engine assembly. We did part 1, and the engine's mostly together. We had to put off finishing it because the owner was missing some parts. So, in that aspect, you know, we couldn't really get too much further. We just had, you know, there's nothing really else to do. So we'll get back to it. We're gonna finish it up. We did already gap the rings, and I've gone over the how-tos of gapping rings a few times. Really isn't any real need to go over that repeatedly over and over and over again. Same thing. We've actually gone over a lot of the engine basic assembly over different videos and stuff like that. Upcoming sneak peek at something that's gonna be coming our way. So here's something neat for you. This is a factory 92 302 rod. Not a factory piston, 30 over piston. Looks like Speed Pro or something like that. Looks like a Hyper Eutectic. But comparing that to this 347 deal, so you can see the rod's longer, what they've done with the piston, shorten up the skirt, moving the ring pack around, all that stuff to make it the same. So well, that's something curious. You can see the ring pack's actually thinner on this. That's another good thing. So a little less drag, a little bit more power. Now, when we're doing this, I already gapped the rings, and like I said, we've gone over it quite a few times on how to gap your rings. I do have a ring tool to expand them. I honestly don't like it. I'm just not, I don't like it. I don't know if the one I got's cheap or what. I've just never used them. In hundreds of engines, I've never used them. So like I said, there's a little dot here, and this dot has to go in a wristband boss location, so it holds this from spinning. Now, a lot of people say, you know, don't spiral on your rings. Well, you're not really spiraling it. So what I like to do is, I see where that goes. I start expanding it by hand, and then when I get to the end, I take this, my feeler blade or whatever else you have, and I use it against the edge, so we're not really scratching up the ring or the side of the piston against the ring lands. Sorry guys, I'm just got home from work and everything. And then I like to take my feeler blade and go around. Next part, you have your oil ring spacer. I like to put that on. You know where your gaps are. We all know we're not supposed to line them up. So put them on, don't line them up, stagger them out. Same thing. This one you can kind of just pull out, but again, I like to do it like this. So you're not scratching up the piston, you're not doing any damage, you won't have any issues, you won't have, you know, those marks in the bore, you won't have anything like that. Now these are used pistons. This was a, like I said before, this was a used engine assembly for this gentleman, and I'm gonna call him that loosely. I'm just kidding, he's a good guy. So if we remembered, I had written down what how our rings went, but I know that this is a Napier style ring, and this is our second ring. So, and they are marked on these ones top. Not all the time are they marked top or bottom. Sometimes that's on you. You have to read the directions, and it'll tell you which way the bevel faces and stuff like that. Again, nothing to be super excited about, nothing to be crazy about. These are a Hellfire set of rings. So again, that's a really good set of rings for what this is. All right, so we have that set. And I've told you guys before about the bearing offset on these. You hear my antifreeze draining. Like I said, we're about to have a talk about that and why I think that is having a lifter issue again. Same company, same brand, you come to find out, but anyway. So these, you'll see on these, there's a bevel. The bevel has to face the cheek of the crank. And these bearings, what they do instead of knife edging them, they actually just make them narrow. And sometimes you'll see, depending on the rod, they'll be marked top or bottom. And that's all you have to do. So you're gonna look, you're gonna watch, put your tangs in, and you see how it's offset there? So that can never hit the cheek of the rod. You line up your tangs, and you see how it's sit there. Now, measuring our bearing clearances, the proper way, and there's arguments longer and longer. The proper way, you see I have a nice crank socket on there. Had that one, particular one for years. So the proper way you're gonna wanna do it is you can take and you'll have your rod journal. It doesn't matter what journal, but you're gonna mic this. And then you're gonna set that up, and then you're gonna put a bore gauge in. And when you zero that out, the difference that you measure in the bearing is gonna be your actual live clearance. Now there's always good old plastic gauge, and everybody uses it, it works. Sometimes I'll use it just as a sanity check if something's not making sense, or something, you know, if it's like a lawnmower engine or something like that I'm throwing together real quick and it'll be fine. But as a sanity check, it works. If the plastic gauge is fresh, it works. If you don't, you know, the problem being is how people use it. If you try to use it on these style rods, I would say you'd probably have to use it on the upper side, because you're gonna have to smack these bolts loose. That's just the way it is. So does plastic gauge work? Yeah. Is a bore gauge a better way? Absolutely, the bore gauge and micrometer is the best way to do this. And that's how I do them. And I do that, I've showed you guys in past videos of it. So again, we got one last cylinder to do. And like I said, always take your file, dress the edges of the rings. I would like to make sure, again, I know that those rings are right, but being as I had written it down, another thing is notes, guys. You can just, so the top rings has pink paint and the second rings have white. And you can see all the different measurements I've made, all the different bearing clearances and torque specs I've used on everything. So that just leaves it right. So we know that the top ring has pink paint and the second ring has white paint. Now, not that that's the way to do it, but that's how just a quick and dirty reference. So there's also arguments of what to use for your bearing lubricants, what to use for your oil. Guys, I'm gonna tell you, don't break your engine in, you know, you just use a good quality oil and you'll be fine. So that's all that is. If you're using a torque spec, most factory specs are with 30 weight oil. ARP stuff generally uses theirs. Now there are some rods out there that will come with their own particular lubricant that they want you to use. When you use their lubricants, sometimes they'll give you a torque spec and a stretch spec. That's, you know, some people prefer to use that versus a torque spec. They will prefer that you use a stretch figure. Some will only give you a stretch figure, and then you'll have torque to yield that will give you like turn this much and then 90 degrees and then back it off, then turn it. Those are a different type of fastener. Just follow the fastener guidelines and you'll be fine. Again, so I always mark these so I know which side goes forward. But if you look down, you see the cheek of the crank with the bevel. You see that bevel, you know it matches up. People, I've seen arguments about which way the tang faces. That's not how they do them. That bearing tang is just there for assembly only most of the time. I just use, some people will use transmission fluid, some people will use oil. Just, I wouldn't use a synthetic oil to assemble an old school engine with a heavy ring pack. Just no need. And like I said, just work it in. And you're gonna wipe off all the extra, but you don't want these dry. These will scrape out the extra. There's been arguments again about people, well, you shouldn't do this or you shouldn't do that. You will have 100 different people arguing. Most engine builders have their way that they've done for a long time that works for them. This is the way I've done it. This is what's worked for me for a long time. So we always carry that. This ring compressor, it's one of the universal deals. I'll tell you, it is not by far the best ring compressor I've ever used. But I loaned a good one out, and the age-old story, the two things you don't loan out are your tools and your wife. And because you don't get them back. And I did not get my ring compressor back. I've kept my wife though. I don't know if she's stuck with me or I'm stuck with her, but either way I'm happy to have her. So this ring compressor is kind of a feel ordeal. You don't want to crank it too tight. You want to, what I like to do is I'll square it up on the bore, tighten it down, back it off a little bit, and then all you're gonna do is I like to use the base of my hammer and go around just gently. I see these guys on TV and they're wailing them. I just never have had that confidence. And then on the bottom end, what I'll do is I'll put my fingers down here. If you have factory style rod bolts, you're gonna use sometimes they give you rubber boots that go on them. Sometimes you can use lengths of hose, but on these, all you have to do is guide it. So you guided it down there. Everything went nice, smooth, no problems, no issues. You can see why they offset that bearing right there. So you see, I'm gonna use a little pointer. So you see that little bevel? Now you see how the bearing's offset, so it can never touch that bevel. So then you're gonna take your cap, line up your tangs. There are some engines that the tangs don't line up on, but I think it's like a BMW I ran into before. But this is the fun part about this girdle, this main girdle. It just, I should just rotate it. I'm trying to be stubborn. Oh, there we go. And not do it. And you can look up, so even though these are Eagle/ARP rods, rod bolts, they're ARP rod bolts. You can look up the specs online by the diameter and the underhead measurement length and the amount of threads on them and stuff like that. You can look all that up, and ARP will have your general guidelines as far as specs go. And then you will definitely screw yourself by having that sitting right there at the perfect spot not to get a wrench on. It only happens when you're recording, so I could spin it, but being as the bearings are in the place where I want them to be, I'm not going to do it right now. That thing is still draining. There we go, snugged up. I'll take this. Since it's snugged up, I like to go over and make sure that they are lubricated. Just a little bit on them, a little bit on the underhead. You do not want to torque these dry, guys. You do not want to torque them dry. And even though ARP fasteners are reusable, they do have a certain number of uses in their lifetime. And generally you can tell that by the fastener's measurements. ARP will give you an out of spec measurement. So that's something to watch out for. It can happen. I had some race engines where, guys would want to reuse their head bolts 90 million times and stuff like that. And I want to say ARP says they're kind of indefinitely reusable till they're not. So you get, and I think we found something like 7 cycles, and then they weren't matching what they were, and they weren't matching what ARP said was allowable anymore. So on something like that. Another thing to watch out for is your rod side clearance. So you do have to have rod side clearance. And again, you can look up through your connecting rod manufacturer. They'll tell you what rod side clearance, and it's a wide range on those. That's not anywhere accurate. And like, I know that I had looked these up, and they want, for these rods, 45 foot-pounds on them. So I like to go back and forth and build to our torque. Then always check, make sure. Make sure. I know that I'm not hitting every one of them. And guys, that's fine. All right, so those are torqued. Everything felt good. And what I like to do is, in between assembling each one, I like to spin it over. Now on these strokers, here's something to watch out for. Like I've said before, you want to check, because your rod bolts on a Ford hit the cylinders if you don't clearance. Being as this is an as-ran block, and it has ran before, it should be clearanced. And it looks good, but go over each one. The one time you forget to check something is the one time it's going to screw you. And so, like I said, I like to leave a nice oily coating on them. Everything feels good. This will seat in nicely for Gino. He should not have any issues with this engine unless he does something dumb, which, that's on a Gino thing. That's not a Sean thing. So we'll let Gino decide what he does. But as far as we know that our bearing clearances are there, we know that our piston clearances, piston to wall and everything like that, are where we want them to be. We know that we've done our due diligence. He bought me a timing set that had a Bluetooth crank sprocket, so that doesn't help us. So we really can't go any further. Head studs. This is a good one. So stock block, small block Ford guys. See that? They go into a water jacket all the way through. Uppers don't. Lowers go all the way through. If you do not seal that, you may get a leak. Thread paste. Some guys will say Loctite. I wouldn't use Loctite. I'd use regular thread sealer. We got some bolts in here. Not all of our think those are oil pump bolts. The boy spent some money. Aftermarket cam guys, if you need to, on a Ford, if you get a big roller, they upsize the bolt, and you need to get a different bolt size for it. Small block Chevy ARP balancer bolt and washer, if you're deleting the cam eccentric, will work perfectly for you. Just a nice little pro tip there. He's missing a head dowel, so that's a thing too. But he does have a good, decent balancer. He does have a stock piston. He had a mystery cam. We decided not to use the mystery cam. We can degree them. We can figure out what the events are, what the specs are. I'm not that interested in it. I'd rather go with the known cam that he already had. That was, I want to say it was like a trick flow stage 2. It's not a perfect cam for what he's doing, but it's a good enough cam. Generally, good enough is good enough, because I think he'll probably either put a turbo on this car or nitrous or something. And if he does that, what's Richard Holdner say? Any cam's a turbo cam. So I believe him on that one with the mild specs they have. The Trick Flow Stage 2 will be a decent turbo cam. So that's our 347 short block done. We didn't, once again, I can't degree it, I can't move on because we don't have our crank gear. But other than that, man, it's just not a bad deal. So, e-boost controls. Guys, if you're interested in how to build a cheap, low rent, closed loop style boost control, let me know in the comments and I'll post a little how-to on how we get it done around here. I have a slick little setup that works very well, and I'd share it with you guys if someone's interested. If not, they can stay with me. Other than that, guys, thanks for watching. We'll try to keep with it. I will be coming on to this thing soon. Like I said, there's some really painful things I have to do to that, and we're gonna make smoke grades while we're in there, and then we'll kind of move on. All right, guys, thanks for watching. As always, I'm gonna ask you, please hit the like, share, subscribe for us. I am trying to grow the channel. I am trying to put out content for you guys. It definitely takes some doing, because just setting up the video or just taking the time the video adds time to it. But I will keep pushing it out there.